Greetings, all.
They're not talking about the best of them. They're just talking about the rest of them. Not the worst parts, but the best parts. This is the best of the rest.
Hello, and that's not heaven. That's the C Train. This is Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at superhero movies that were poorly received upon release, but only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It is sometimes a challenge, but it's always a good time. And today we are talking Daredevil. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined as always by the man who never misses an opportunity to talk about comic books, Andrew Williams. You ready to dive into this one, Andrew?
I am. I have a deep connection to Daredevil because we both have red hair and we can't see.
Yeah, Andrew, you've got Coke bottle glasses on right now for our
yes.
listeners. Yeah. What's your history with this movie? Did you see it in theaters?
I think so, yeah. This was 2003. So I would have been like sophomore in high school. So I think my dad came to me and we saw it. He came to me on like Saturday and was like, hey, that Daredevil movie's out. Do you want to go watch that? And I was like, yeah, sure. So we went on like a Sunday afternoon. And I can't say it stuck with me in any meaningful way. I feel like I definitely got it on DVD that Christmas. And I don't recall revisiting it very often. Let's put it that way. So.
Got it. I saw it in theaters. I saw this movie in theaters with my stepdad. I also saw Spider-Man in theaters with him the year before. So kind of had a tradition going. So we went and saw Daredevil. I remember some thoughts about it because I didn't love the movie by any means, but I do remember saying this. I said, I liked that more than Spider-Man. I'm not going to sit here and say that I stand by that. As we've talked about on previous episodes, I'm just not the biggest fan of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. So we'll say that at the time it was clearing a low bar for me. But which movie's better? I don't know. Who's to say? Interestingly, I did not remember this, though. The movie came out February 14th, 2003. Came out on Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
Not the typical Valentine's Day release. I feel for every girlfriend that was dragged to this movie because they were told it's actually a romance that just happens to have a superhero. I don't know how they tried to swing that to get people in the theaters, but it's such an odd time.
Pretty sure some men went home alone after taking their girlfriends to see this movie. So
the movie had a budget of $78 million, brings in $179 million at the box office. That's a success. That's a profit. Wasn't breaking any records. Critically, not very well received. Just a 44% on Rotten Tomatoes. The audience score is not any better, 35%. It's actually a little bit lower than the critic score.
Yeah, the legacy of this movie is not immensely positive. Generally speaking, I don't know if the legacy necessarily, like rewatching it, I was like, I don't know. I don't feel like a lot of people like were pointing to Affleck and saying that this was like the bottom of the barrel type stuff at the time, and I just don't feel that way. But no, but genuinely, people just felt the movie didn't really leave much of an impact. There's a lot stuffed into this movie. There are a lot of things going on, a lot of characters and a lot of plots that are all kind of fighting for screen time here. Does somehow manage to get a spinoff, though.
You know what? We're probably going to talk about it someday. But this first movie is what we're talking about today. And when I think of the reception of this movie, that early 2000s, 2003, I feel like this was part of we as a society collectively just getting sick of Ben Affleck. This comes out the same year as Geely, and there was a big backlash against that movie, against Ben Affleck, against Jennifer Lopez, and how he ended his relationship with Jennifer Garner. I mean, we could get friend of the show, my wife, on here to break down how these relationships broke apart, led to the other. It's a whole messy thing, but there was certainly a time when the world just wanted nothing to do with Ben Affleck until he reinvents himself as a very good director a few years later. But this was certainly at the height of the backlash, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think he kind of blew up there in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I think, I think that's a good way to kind of look at it, is I think the world was just kind of over Ben Affleck at the time. Because it was not just that, like, he was in all of these things. It was that they were all kind of generally seen as, like, very mediocre. So he was not just everywhere. None of it was really good either.
Sure.
And then obviously the Bennifer media attention had them all over the place. And now again, because time is a flat circle. So yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it, where just it really, as a society, we had just moved beyond Ben Affleck.
It's funny because Ben Affleck's career it's always linked with Matt Damon, right? They came up together, they're good friends, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember seeing this SNL skit where it was making fun of Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. I believe they are fighting for this girl's attention, and she is like, "Oh, I want nothing to do with you, Matt Damon. Ben Affleck's the real actor." Like, that was the whole joke of it. But 2003, moving into like 2008, whenever the Bourne movies take off, like, that could not be farther from the truth. Yeah, switches. I think they kind of recently maybe evened back out, but there was certainly a time one hits first, then the other hits, and then
no, that's the idea that there was a joke that Ben Affleck was the real actor of the duo is, like, in hindsight, is, like, hilarious.
Now, this movie is written and directed by Mark Steven Johnson. And I have said those words before back on our Ghost Rider episode, because that movie was also written and directed by Mark Steven Johnson. Now, he does this one first. Daredevil comes out a few years before Ghost Rider. Before this, like we said on the Ghost Rider episode, this man wrote Grumpy Old Men and Grumpier Old Men, and one of my personal favorite Christmas movies, Jack Frost, starring
the man himself, Michael Keaton.
One of the greatest actor of all time. There's a lot of them.
We're discounting Henry Rollins in that movie, but no. But yeah, no, this is actually, he goes from Daredevil to Ghost Rider. He doesn't really do anything in between. So for a while there, that man was living superheroes.
It's interesting. A writer and director in a superhero, it doesn't happen often.
No.
Yeah, it's almost like an auteur approach. And the man just total creative control on this.
And to do two different superheroes for two different studios, I think. So yeah, that's really kind of unprecedented, especially at the time.
At one point, this movie was with different production companies. It bounces around. Development is long and storied. You don't need to get into all of that. But Chris Columbus was attached to direct it, and that just sounds like a totally different Daredevil movie. Chris Columbus, most notably known for Home Alone. I think he stuck around for Home Alone too, but just very much a family-friendly director, which is not what I think of when I think of Daredevil.
I agree. He's an early writer on stuff like Gremlins, and if Gremlins to this is, at least there's, in Gremlins you have some twinges of something a little bit darker. But yeah, generally speaking, not what I would see as like a dark Daredevil-esque director. Although they claim he's making a Five Nights at Freddy's movie, so we'll see. Maybe he's got it in him, and we'll see it.
Well, in this movie, Ben Affleck stars as Matt Murdock, a blind attorney who spends his nights fighting criminals as the vigilante Daredevil. After falling for Elektra Natchios, his new Flame's father is murdered, and Elektra believes Daredevil is the killer. After wounding the hero in battle, Elektra learns the true killer was an assassin named Bullseye. When she confronts her father's murderer, she too is killed. Now Daredevil sets out to stop not only Bullseye, but the man behind all of New York's crime, the Kingpin. Andrew, let's talk about the cast in this movie. And of course, you know what we're going to do. We're going to start at the top, at the high point, at the best casting and the best performance in this movie. We like to recognize that actor or actress by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So Andrew, in the cast of Daredevil, who gets your Mark Strong Award?
I am giving my Mark Strong Award to the man who is also in the movie, which begat the Mark Strong Award, Michael Clarke Duncan as Wilson Fisk.
Nice. Yes. He was Kilowog in Green Lantern, where, of course, Mark Strong was also in that movie, and that's where he became the greatest actor of all time.
Right. If Kilowog had more screen time, it may have been the Michael Clarke Duncan Award. But as history unfolded, but no, he steps in here as Wilson Fisk Kingpin, and I think he does a great job. He's not got a lot of screen time, which I had kind of, I guess my brain believed he was in the movie a lot more than he is. But
yeah, same,
I think
definitely.
I think he's still extremely effective. In fact, if possibly even more effective, having such a reduced role. But he's coming in. He's got the menacing kind of undertones, like he's doing this kind of corporate businessman exterior, but you can feel the kind of criminal, violent underside kind of bubbling beneath him. You feel threatened by this guy. Like when he starts threatening other people, like it doesn't feel fake. You feel for these people. You're like, oh, that guy's in danger. Something bad's about to happen to him. So no, I think he does a great job here. I think he's definitely the standout. I don't think there's any question as far as I'm concerned that I definitely would have enjoyed seeing him come back in this role. Obviously, he did not and now cannot. But
R.I.P. Michael Clarke Duncan.
Yes, rest in peace. But he's making the most of what he's got here, and I think he's really dialed in. And I think the movie is all the better for it.
Michael Clarke Duncan as Wilson Fisk, no joke, is some of my favorite casting in all of superhero movies. It's something I probably wouldn't have immediately thought of, but as soon as I hear it or see it, I'm like, wow, that is incredible. It's impressive that in 2003, which is at the same time a long time ago, but also not a long time ago, right. I appreciate that they gave this role to a black man, because Kingpin in the comics is a large white dude, but who cares? That's not what defines the character. They cast someone who is perfect for the role, and in doing so, gave a great opportunity to a great actor who 100% deserves it and embodies the character. When you think of Kingpin, you think of menacing, you think of at first sight, you're like, holy crap, that is a towering, scary, intimidating presence. And that's exactly what he brings to it. He brings charisma. You can believe that he can schmooze his way up to the top, but also have the muscle to back it up. It's everything you want in the character of the Kingpin. However, that's not who I'm giving my Mark Strong Award to. Going into this movie, that's 100% what I expected, because, like I said, I love the casting. I've always loved the casting. He's in the movie, like I said, a little bit less than I remembered. And someone else in this movie was just undeniably entertaining to me every single second they were on screen. Andrew, I'm sure you know who exactly what I'm going to say.
I feel like I know who you're going with, yes. So
Colin Farrell as Bullseye gets the Mark Strong Award for me. Now, let's unpack this a little bit, because as much as Michael Clarke Duncan is embodying everything I think of when I think of comic book Kingpin, Colin Farrell's not doing that for Bullseye. This is certainly a different take than Bullseye. I mean, they're both marksmen. That's kind of about where the similarities stop. But I just, like I said, what he's doing is undeniably entertaining. Now, does it match the tone of the movie? The movie's tone doesn't match the tone of the movie. We'll jump into that. This movie has a bit of an identity crisis when it comes to the tone. But he's on screen. I'm entertained. He's making choices. This is peak weirdo Colin Farrell, who goes through a lot of different phases throughout his career. And I loved it.
No, I agree. I actually thought about that when I finished watching it. I was like, he's having a blast every time he's on screen. Like, he's running with it. He's leaning into it. He's having a good time with it. Like, he's killing people left and right. He's going hard.
Chewing the hell out of that scenery.
Out of all of it. And like I said, going deep. And it's great. I can't pretend that he's not definitely a standout here, because he's like every scene he had. Like, even the ones where he's just like his introduction scene where he's in the bar and like kills a dude with a paperclip. And then like he's on a plane, he kills him. Like the first 3 scenes he's in, he kills somebody in all of them.
And he's having a great time doing it. I mean, he murders an elderly woman and we laugh and enjoy. I mean, that's true. He had it coming, to be fair.
Yeah, but no, like he and the third guy he kills for the motorcycle is actually one of the many cameos in this movie. It's Frank Miller.
Yeah, fun fact. Notable for a lot of things, but obviously being a writer for Daredevil.
One of the most, probably the person who brought Daredevil from like into prominence as far as his run goes. But yeah, he's having a blast here. I can't say that's a bad choice whatsoever, that I even disagree with it. He's another guy that just, he's in. Like I said, does he necessarily tonally match with everything else? You're right. There's a greater conversation about the tone of this movie, but he's having a blast.
His look is interesting. They made some choices there as well. Now,
yes.
you can, but it'd be very strange to do a 1-for-1 with his comic book look, which is, it's head to toe spandex. It's like blue and white. He's got almost like a Cyclops style cowl, and on his forehead in his costume is the bullseye. And that's how I know his bullseye. They do away with that. And I don't know if this is more grounded or realistic per se, but instead of a elaborate superhero costume, it's a black leather jacket, and on his forehead is a bullseye carved
imprinted. Yeah.
As scars. I don't know, but he's constantly touching it. It's almost like that's where he gets his power from. He's always referencing his forehead bullseye. So in a way, it's accurate to the comics. I mean, he's got a bullseye on his head. He's bald instead of wearing a cowl.
He's pretty accurate. That's his big thing in this movie, is he kind of almost solely hates Daredevil because he makes him miss once. Like,
yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Like, that's literally his entire beef with Daredevil for the most part.
He's a hired assassin, but he's not hired to kill Daredevil. He's just like, he made me miss. I never missed. I got to kill him.
And Kingpin's like, all right. It's like, I ain't gonna stop you. No, he's got some really great scenes. I did like that at one point when he's talking to Kingpin about to go fight Daredevil. He's like, I want a costume. And then he shows up in the next scene and he's dressed exactly the same.
Yeah, he breaks into Kingpin's like lair, I guess, hideout, and he just murdered his guard to get in there. You see, he's got like pencils in his throat. Kingpin's like, that crazy bullseye. What do you want? Doesn't even bat an eye.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, yeah, it's just fun. He's having like I said, he's murdering people brutally, but he's having fun with it. And it's just every turn, he's having a blast. And no, Colin Farrell's one of my favorite actors. Pretty much everything he's in, I try to enjoy to some degree, even Total Recall. But he's definitely channeling that weirdness here.
Yeah. I almost feel like this performance could have worked if he had no dialogue, because he's acting with like every molecule of his body. He's always widening his eyes. Like he gets like a high from killing people and from hitting his target. And he's doing a lot. And he doesn't have a ton of dialogue. He's kind of a man of few words. They almost could have just went all the way with it had him not talk at all. But
yeah,
he gets to use his actual Irish accent, which I believe this is the first time in an American movie he's been able to do so. So very appreciated that. And they did something that reminded me of X-Men Apocalypse. Whenever we first meet him at the bar, there is a song playing. Did you catch that song, Andrew?
I actually wanted to look up what it was because I recognized it, because it's definitely
very prominently. You can hear the line, "You see, I'm Irish, but I'm not a leprechaun." The song is "Top of the Morning to You" by House of Pain. Yeah. It's all about being Irish. And you know what? The thing about Bullseye in this movie, he's Irish.
Yeah, it ends like with, I heard that "Top of the Morning to You," and I was like, oh, because he's Irish. It was like that scene in Zack Snyder's Justice League where Aquaman's walking down the pier and there's a song that's like, "There is a kingdom, there is a king." And I was like, oh, because he's the king of Atlantis. Got it.
Yeah.
Nailed it. First try.
Subtle. Well, let's talk about our hero. Ben Affleck plays our hero, Ben Affleck, Andrew. Ben Affleck plays Matt Murdock, also known as Daredevil. Now,
spoilers. Sorry, folks.
Let's go back to 2003 a little bit, because Ben Affleck's had like 4 different careers and ebbs and flows and is in a good place right now. 2003, I mean, throughout the 90s, mostly bit parts, Dazed and Confused, every Kevin Smith movie. Eventually starts to heat up with movies like Armageddon, Pearl Harbor, and The Sum of All Fears. So he's kind of making that transition to leading man. Quality of those movies is what it is, as we alluded to earlier. 2003 gets Daredevil and Geely. Beginning of the end of this leg of his career, I would say.
Also, Paycheck, I think, deserves an honorable mention for 2003 as well.
That I feel like I was the only person who knew who Aaron Eckhart was when he was cast in The Dark Knight because I had seen the movie Paycheck. Yeah.
Nice. Paycheck definitely on the lower end of John Woo's American output. But yeah, so it's kind of a trifecta here of movies that failed to impress, to put it as nicely as possible.
What do you think about us? You know what? Before we get to the performance, you brought up the hair earlier. Let's talk about this a little bit, Andrew. Matt Murdock. I mean, he's doing a lot for representation, right? He's representing handicapped. He's blind. I always thought super cool about him. He's a blind superhero. Also representing redheads out there. Now, Andrew, you're a redhead.
Yes.
I got to ask you, how do you feel? Let's take this one step. I got a few questions for you. Let's keep it simple.
All right.
Do you feel like they should have cast a natural redhead as Matt Murdock?
No, not necessarily. Continue to the next question.
All right, next question. They sort of give Ben Affleck red hair in this movie.
Yes.
Even the kid who's playing like young Matt Murdock, it's kind of red, but it's a shade of red. It doesn't look like your hair. It doesn't look like a natural redhead. It looks like someone dyed their hair kind of red. It's not a natural red.
No.
Does that bother you, or do you appreciate the attempt to give them some red hair kind of?
No. We don't appreciate phonies.
Okay.
So you keep it real, or you don't do it at all. You go the Charlie Cox route and just cast him and say, who cares? But don't mock me. Don't patronize me. Don't act like he's one of us.
I don't know if, I mean, you'd have to do a wig. I don't know if you can dye someone's hair to look like a natural red. I feel like the only other route is like you cast a redhead, you give him a wig, or you just say, you know what, this version of Daredevil isn't redheaded. So Charlie Cox, yeah, they don't even try to make him look a redhead. Does that, is that erasure though? Is that?
I don't care.
No, it's not that important to you.
It's not that important. I mean, the honest to God truth at the end of the day is hair color is not going to make or break anything. I mean, I'm not like it's you joke about it because like when you think about superheroes with red hair, there's not a whole lot of them. It's like Daredevil, Wally West, and a couple of the Legion of Superheroes. But yeah, at the end of the day, like I really could care less.
But it's safe to say you prefer if they just let him just have brown hair, like, not even try.
Who cares? Like it's one of those things where like it's like you said, dyeing your hair red is like something that it's very difficult to pull off and have it look natural. And that's just the process. Like that's not necessarily a shot at anybody. But yeah, I don't think it's something like on a certain level. Yeah, I kind of appreciate that there was at least that like it occurred to somebody that like, oh wait, Daredevil has red hair. We should do that. And I'm like, yeah, I can appreciate that. But at the end of the day, I'm like, your movie's not going to be made or broken by the fact that Daredevil has slightly red hair.
Now, Daredevil, he's Catholic. That's a big part of his character. He has red hair. Is Daredevil Irish?
I would assume there's some history there. Yes.
It's interesting that they made Bullseye prominently Irish.
Yes. And they were like Daredevil, but yeah, I think I don't know for sure. I couldn't say, but I mean,
he doesn't have like a thick comical not that okay. I had a word that I almost said comical Irish accent. I'm not trying to say Irish accents are comical. Obviously, even in the comics, it's not like he has like a exaggerated Irish accent or anything. I was just trying to put the puzzle pieces together. But hey,
I feel like you're onto something.
Let's jump into Ben Affleck's performance, though. Apparently, Ben Affleck, a big fan of Daredevil, much like Nicolas Cage being a big fan of Ghost Rider, got to play that character. I saw this interview with him where he said he's always been a Daredevil enthusiast. And in regards to reading Daredevil comics, whether or not he's read all of them, he said, I thought I had. I was pretty sure I had. And then I went back and made sure I read every issue of Daredevil ever published. Bold claim that he's read them all. But whether that's true, I'm sure he certainly read a lot of them. And he said it was more about taking away what I already knew and had been a fan of since I was a kid and faithfully delivering that to the screen. We've said it before. I love when there's that personal connection to the character. I love that he's a fan of the character and his goal is to do right by the fans. And I don't think there's anything Ben Affleck's doing here that goes against that. I don't think he's insulting the character or betraying anything that the character is about.
I agree. And that's actually what I thought was kind of interesting is like people point to like Daredevil and like, when Affleck got cast as Batman, there was a lot of people that were like, we saw Daredevil, and like rewatching this, I was like, yeah, and he's fine. Like, it's like, there's nothing here that's like, is it, reinventing the wheel? No, but like, it's fine. Like he's bringing it in. He's got the kind of balance that he's trying to kind of find as also being Daredevil, combining it with his personal life. He's got a weird, dark apartment.
Yeah, but, I mean, why does he need lights?
Yeah, he doesn't. But like, just even the design aesthetic, I was like, is that concrete? I guess, whatever.
Yeah.
But no, I think he's fine here. Like, I don't think like you said, there's nothing like offensively out of character here. Like, there's nothing missing the mark. I think he's really doing the best that he can. And there were some interesting other people that were up for it. Matt Damon actually claimed that he was in the role running for it, but he didn't believe in the script as much as Affleck did. Guy Pearce mentioned he was up for it or got offered it even, which would have been interesting.
I can see that.
And a couple of others, but Ben Affleck, really, I think his dedication and his excitement about it was definitely part of the factoring in there. But yeah, I think you're clearly seeing a guy who's bringing everything he has to it. Like I said, is it the greatest motion picture performance of all time? Certainly not. But yeah, I think everything he's doing here is fine. I think the if you want to say it as the weak parts of the movie, I don't think Affleck is where you start, for certainly.
No, this movie's got some issues. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the good stuff about the movie, but those issues are not because of this casting.
No.
Now, the director, Mark Steven Johnson, said that those contacts that he's wearing, the like milky blue contacts, actually blocked his vision. And Ben Affleck could not see when he was wearing those contacts, which, in the director's opinion, enhanced his performance. And kudos to Ben Affleck. Probably didn't have to do that, but
certainly not.
It must have been interesting to actually be blind on set.
I just take my glasses off and it's the same thing. But no, yeah, it's an interesting. It's like you said, it's one of those little things that you're just going a little bit further than you probably had to, but it's always appreciated.
Jennifer Garner plays Elektra Natchios. Now, at this time, undoubtedly most known for Alias, hit TV show. Like most shows that I talk about on this podcast, I've never watched it, but I know it was very popular, actually running at the time. She was still making that show when she made this movie. I saw in her filmography that she was actually also in Pearl Harbor, which I don't remember. Apparently she was a nurse in Pearl Harbor. But again, Alias is undoubtedly what gets her this role. She's obviously fit. She's believable when she's doing the martial arts moves needed to play Elektra. And you mentioned there's a lot stuffed in this movie. We get, of course, Daredevil's origin, and we basically get Elektra's origin in this movie as well.
We have a lot of moving pieces here. They really do try to put a lot into this movie. Some might say too much, but yeah, we get literally Daredevil's origin, Elektra's origin, and turning like into Elektra. We get Bullseye's introduction and his part in this. We get Fisk's introduction and his parts in this. There's a lot going on here. But yeah, she's believable. The fights are pretty good generally. I mean, like I said, they're not like raid level brutality, but the playground fight is certainly a choice. But yeah, obviously this was another role where like there were apparently like dozens of people considered of all different ethnicities, all different types, even ages. Apparently, like Jennifer Gardner, Kate Winslet, Penelope Cruz, Salma Hayek, Lucy Liu, Jessica Alba, Katie Holmes, like really all over the place with who they were looking for this role. Elektra in the comics is Greek. And that's definitely something that they've used as part of the character, played around with the character, definitely brought it as the varying depictions over the years have worked with that. But yeah, I think Jennifer Gardner is certainly, I mean, Alias, I think, is adjacent to what she's doing here, and it works generally.
I think I've got pretty much the same review of her performance as Ben Affleck's. She's not bringing it down. She's not insulting the character, not doing anything wrong. Maybe not going the other way either, not elevating anything. But if this movie has issues, I don't think it's related to Jennifer Garner playing Elektra.
No.
Jon Favreau plays the lead superhero's best friend.
For the first time.
He plays Foggy Nelson, who is Matt Murdock's friend and partner in law. Partner-in-law.
Yes, partner-in-law.
There was a time when Jon Favreau and Vince Vaughn were the same person. They look a little bit different, but their performance and mannerisms, their sense of humor are all exactly the same. And this is that era of Jon Favreau. By that, I mean, not every joke he makes is going to make me laugh, but I appreciate what he's doing here.
Yeah, just when you put it that way, I'm like, you really could have just like copy and pasted Vince Vaughn into that role and it would have been identical. Like it really 100%. Would have, from like Maid and Swingers. And yeah, they just apparently like just merged out of the same person. But yeah, he's the comic relief. I mean, that's his job in this movie, basically, is to quip to Daredevil while they're in their civilian guises. He routinely bemoans that their clients pay them in odd ways, sports equipment, fish, things like that. But that's just kind of building off of Matt and Foggy's practice, which mostly protects smaller innocent people being targeted by kind of bigger corporations or kind of nastier people. Almost John Grisham in that sense. But yeah, it's like I said, not everything lands. It's not all. They can't all be zingers.
And like our director, Mark Steven Johnson, and like Michael Clarke Duncan, we've talked about Jon Favreau before. He was in Batman Forever in a much smaller part. Yeah, very briefly. Joe Pantoliano, Joey Pants himself, plays Ben Urich, the reporter that I usually associate with Spider-Man. But of course, like Kingpin, a lot of these characters, they really share the universe between Spider-Man and Daredevil. And he does a fine job. He wears that 90s ass hat so well. He looks good in it. He reports on myths of the city.
So yeah, he's kind of got a role. He's kind of got a role as a much more serious version of like Alexander Knox from Batman, where he's like the one guy that's like out in the press trying to like make Daredevil a thing, and the cops don't really cooperate and people aren't really going along with it. And it's created and turned Daredevil into more of like an urban legend than an actual thing, similar again to Batman. And Urich is from the comics. He debuts in the Daredevil comics. I think he's one of those characters that kind of like obviously debuts with a certain character, but then just his particular skill set or character, which is journalist, allows it to apply to a lot of stuff.
Especially in New York, where many Marvel characters are based.
Spider-Man and a bunch of others are all at. So no, I like Joe here. I think he's got, like I said, he's kind of, again, we're adding more to this movie, which is definitely what it needs. So, but he's the guy that's investigating Daredevil and trying to kind of prove that Daredevil is out there and be more than just an urban legend, and potentially expose it to give some semblance of hope to people that may not have any, that kind of thing.
I like Joey Pants a lot. He's like a journeyman in Hollywood. He's been in everything. Oh, yeah. His filmography is very dense. In the 90s, what I probably most know him from is Bad Boys. He's in all of them, but the first Bad Boys, he's the police chief. And in this period of like 99 to 2005, he's in like everything. He's, of course, in The Matrix. He's in Memento, which I often cite as my favorite movie of all time. So I've seen him a lot. He's, of course, in this as well. And he's very good at either playing a straight villain or just a smarmy weasel type character. So whenever you're casting a reporter who's always getting up in everybody's business to try to get down to the bottom of things, Joe Pantoliano makes sense.
Absolutely. I can't believe you left out the cinematic classic Ready to Rumble, where he plays Titus Sinclair, but that definitely fits into the roles you just described him in. That definitely fits into that. But no, Memento too. Just his role in that, he's tremendous in it. He's bringing it. And here he's in a small role, but I like what he's doing.
That covers probably our main cast. There's a few shout-outs I want to go through here, though. David Keith plays Jack Murdock, Matt Murdock's father, who is a boxer, and in a flashback towards the beginning of this movie, we see gets killed and really sets Daredevil on his path. And I think he does a great job. He's just got a few key scenes with his son. It's the classic thing. He's trying to do what's right, even if it means breaking the law or doing what's wrong, but he'll do anything to protect his son, provide for his son, and try to make sure his son gets a better life. And those scenes all really work for me. And it's no doubt in large part to David Keith's performance. It's funny, friend of the show, my wife mentioned that he looked like he could have played Marv. He's kind of got that look to him.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, well, Mickey Rourke was also a boxer, and David Keith does a great job, but I couldn't help but wonder, like, this would have been a great spot for Mickey Rourke, kind of before his
resurgence.
Yeah, this could have like really kicked that off, because I think he also would have done a great job in that role. But David Keith, awesome job.
Yeah, and he's a guy that I normally see playing less scrupulous characters. I remember him notably from Major League 2, where he plays a real bastard. But in this one, he really does find that great balance of like one of the big moments that leads to Matt's accident is when he sees his dad kind of acting as an enforcer for like a mobster. Right. And that leads to him kind of running around this loading dock where he ends up causing a forklift to run under those chemicals, which hits his eyes. And that moment, his dad is kind of like, no, I need to fix this. And so his dad starts retraining to be a boxer while Matt starts retraining himself on everything he needs to learn now. And they kind of, like he says in the movie, they kind of watching out for each other, kind of pushing each other to be the best version they can be. And yeah, you buy it. It works. And it's no small part due to David Keith bringing it and giving it all he's got.
Eric Avari plays Nicholas Nachios, Elektra's father. Again, not a lot of screen time, but you probably didn't recognize that name, Eric Avari. But pause this podcast, Google image Eric, E-R-I-C-K, Avari, A-V-A-R-I, and you will see his face and it'll go, oh yeah, that guy. He is the ultimate, oh yeah, that guy actor. He's in absolutely everything. I watched The Mummy like a week ago. Eric Avari is in it. I did not know his name until I was researching this episode, but he's in a million and one things and always a welcome presence.
Always. Yeah. Like I said, you look at his filmography and there is a 99% chance you have seen him in something.
Ellen Pompeo plays Karen Page, who I'm trying to think if she's even named. Maybe they name her Karen.
I think she's literally in one scene. I don't think she's in anything else.
And it's incredible because Karen Page is a major character in the comics.
Right.
They explore this character a lot in the Netflix Daredevil.
Right.
She does traditionally work with Matt and Foggy and as a love interest, the most significant love interest for Matt Murdock, kind of on again, off again thing.
Right.
And this seems like high level casting in retrospect because Ellen Pompeo, most people know now from Grey's Anatomy. She's done it for, 28 seasons or however long it's been on. Right. But she had a few movies during this time. She's in a movie called Moonlight Mile with another great actor, Jake Gyllenhaal, and Dustin Hoffman. She was Rainin. I really like that movie, but did a few bit parts like this one before really hitting big with Grey's Anatomy. But yeah, it's just funny seeing such a recognizable actress in such a small role, but also a very important character, but that this movie just doesn't dive into.
Right. Yeah. I think this, and I think she's an Old School the same year, both in like very, very small parts. In this case, a part that like you legit could almost blink and miss this scene. It's legit, I think, one scene. And yeah, it's one of those things that's always interesting to look back on, and everybody starts somewhere.
Now, there's a director's cut of this movie. Andrew, I didn't watch the director's cut. I want to make sure we're talking about the version most people have seen. I assume you also watched theatrical, right?
I did. If Coolio is not the movie you saw, you saw the original theatrical, not the director's cut. Coolio is your barometer.
It's exactly what I was going to say. That alone, just reading that, I'm going to watch the director's cut at some point. I got to see what they're doing. Coolio, we've also talked about him before.
We have.
And Robin.
Every like I said, it all comes back around. That director's cut, I mean, like I said, we're not talking about that movie. There are a lot of people who feel it's a significant improvement, though. It is like legit 40 more minutes. So it's turns this movie into a pretty long one.
2 hours and 15 minutes is what Google says.
Yeah, it's definitely, generally speaking, it is seen as an improvement. Maybe one day we'll circle back around. But for this time, we're talking about the theatrical.
Now, with that, it's time to jump into this movie and talk about some scenes that we like. And of course, we're going to start with what we consider the best scene of the movie. Andrew, in your opinion, what's the best scene of the movie? When is it firing on all cylinders?
Springboarding off of my Mark Strong pick, I'm going with the final fight between Kingpin and Daredevil at the end of the film. Not long. Like the last 20, 30 minutes of this movie goes real hard. Yeah. Lots of stuff happens. Like it goes straight from like Elektra's training montage to their like triple threat fight with Bullseye, Elektra, and Daredevil, straight into the Daredevil Bullseye fight, straight into the Daredevil Fisk fight. Like it's going fast.
I think the only scene in between the Bullseye fight and the Kingpin fight is Daredevil kneeling at the corner of a rooftop like a gargoyle. Just you got a shot of him brooding for a while, and then he takes on Kingpin. It's like he had to take a deep breath, and then all right, let's keep going.
Yeah, but no, that fight, it's again, we're talking probably sub 5 minutes, but it's basically like Kingpin knows he's coming, like, and he tells us like send everybody home. So like I just thought that to me is just a super badass moment where Kingpin is like, I'm gonna handle this myself. I'm gonna do this my way. So he like sends everybody home. Daredevil comes in, they're fighting around. I think the way that he ultimately gets the edge on him by like busting out all the water mains so that the water is making all the noise so he can see Kingpin. I think that's cool. Their kind of final monologue, or not monologue, but duologue conversation with each other is really cool. Like where Kingpin is all just like, I'll tell everybody who you are, because he figures out who he is. And he's like, yeah, tell everybody in prison you got beat by a blind guy. See how that goes for you. And but yeah, I just think it's really, really cool. And obviously there's tons of setup there for more. I definitely feel like the movie was definitely implying this would not be the last fight between these two.
Yeah.
But just think it's really cool.
I agree. Yeah, it notably doesn't end with him killing Kingpin. It ties into some themes that the movie is going for, but also just leaves it open for him to come back. Kingpin's heading off to prison. And in comic books, whenever a character goes to prison, it's a revolving door. You know, they can be right back out there. And they say as much. He's like, I'll be waiting. That's what Daredevil says.
Yep.
I agree. I like that it's a short, gritty fight because we just come off this long, extended fight with Bullseye. That is total CG land, which we'll jump into, but it's way over the top. Lots of big set pieces. And this one is just, they're in like a box. They're in just, his office, but there's a lot of wide shots where it's just a box and these two characters. Let's go.
Yep.
Kingpin gets to flex his muscles. And another great thing I love about this Michael Clarke Duncan casting is that Kingpin is traditionally just a very large man. Like he's always strong, but he's rotund, he's round. And I like what they do in this one where Michael Clarke Duncan this dude's jacked. He's got these giant muscles. I mean, he's huge in a different way. And
he's a brick house, pardon the French, but like
there you go.
He's a wall. It's crazy.
I actually watched this movie with some friends, and one of them points out that he does a gorilla press. He lifts Daredevil above his head, and he does something interesting. He doesn't drop him to the floor. He doesn't do a backbreaker. He throws him into the ceiling, which that's awesome. Cool as hell. Yeah, you don't see this very creative thing to do.
Right.
They just have a slugfest in not almost in the rain. It's like you said, it's the water main, the sprinklers, but it makes for a very cool visual.
Right.
And then the way Daredevil eventually takes him out, where he slides between his legs and he kicks both of his kneecaps at the same time. Like I cringe at that, like every time.
Yeah,
like,
that's
feel that. And he drops down to his knees and he's out after that.
Yeah.
I agree. And honestly, not my pick for best scene, but I was strongly considered as definitely in my mind. So awesome pick. Here's what I'm going to go with from my favorite scene in the movie. I actually like the origin scene, the flashback with him and his dad telling the story of Daredevil.
Yep.
So at the beginning of this movie, it starts off actually with him in the middle of these two fights about the fight, Bullseye, and he's wounded. He's at a church. We see that he's bleeding. He literally drops to the floor in this church. And they could have had like a record scratch here. And like, yep, that's me. I bet you're wondering how I got here. And then we flash back and we get his story.
we get a monologue. It's not nearly as entertaining, but like it does do the whole. They say right before you die, your whole life flashes before your eyes, and it's true.
Even for a blind man, yeah. Yeah, they definitely do like they're going for like a noir thing with that.
Right.
That
in media res, it's called. And media res is that term where they start in the present, flashback, and then bring us up to date. And that's obviously what they're doing here, which is a cool approach. It's different.
Yeah, and it's actually, before I jump into my favorite scene, you get Daredevil like in full costume in the very beginning of this movie. That's pretty rare for super movies. Usually they make you wait like 40 minutes. Like maybe you get like that crappy homemade costume at first, and then that debuts the awesome costume. And we haven't talked about his costume yet. I like Daredevil's costume. I
do too.
Okay, good. Because I've heard a lot of people say, contrary to that. But you look at Daredevil in the comics, you look at this Daredevil, I think it's a wonderful adaptation. Red leather head to toe, which is usually hard to translate into the screen. I love what they do with his cowl, because the whole thing where like the bodysuit is connected to the headpiece works on the page. Hard to make that work in real life. Batman, obviously, they have a cowl that goes down to his neck, but they do something different here. He's got a high collar, and then he's got a cowl that is just like a skull cap. I don't know how to describe this thing. I've never seen anything like it, though. And I think it just is a very cool way to translate the comic. It looks rad. He's got the double D on his chest. He's got little horns. He looks like Daredevil. I think it's really cool. That Netflix TV show, probably ultimately at the end of the day, a better, more accurate depiction of Daredevil. I don't know. That's fine. But the costume, I'm going the movie.
I was just about to say, I'm like, this may be a hot take. I think this costume is better than the Netflix costume.
I agree.
The Netflix show is really trying to take that, like, what kind of suit would a guy need if he was actually getting beat up like this all the time?
Yeah.
And I always kind of
a
hate
super powered character who is blind, but has like you already get this premise that's not in reality. Like, come on,
right.
guys.
I always get annoyed when they do that, because I'm just like, no, this is not. And like, as much as I love the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, he's also really kind of very much was like leaning into the, what would Batman really need to be a thing? And I'm like, I don't need Batman to really need to be a thing. I don't need you to approach it from that perspective.
It's that X-Men thing where like you take all the fun out of it,
Right. I'm like, this is like Batman at the end of the day is a dude in a bat costume, like fighting murder clowns. Like it's not real. But the costume here though, I like it. I think it's like, obviously you're not getting the skin tight spandex like they've done in the past in the comics. Obviously that's kind of how it's presented, but I think this is a cool way of translating it while still keeping that sense of comics accuracy.
I agree. We're on the same page there. But okay, my favorite scene. So we got the origin. We jump back to him as a kid, and it is pretty straightforward with classic Daredevil origin. Normally he's in the street when chemicals splash on him. Now he's like in an alley. Who cares? Although that does erase the Ninja Turtles.
Yes.
Because in the comics, what is somewhat canon is that the same chemicals that splash on Daredevil in the street go into the sewer and create the Ninja Turtles.
I believe that's more of Ninja Turtles canon, not so much Daredevil canon, but
canon is canon, man.
It's canon to something.
Yeah, I don't mind that change. And in fact, after he is blind, there is a moment that I feel like is referencing the comic book origin where Stan Lee is about to step into the street, and then blind Matt Murdock as a kid stops him, and then a truck runs by. And I feel like they're kind of having fun with not only Stan Lee cameo, but referencing that classic origin. But what makes this scene my favorite? One, it's true to the character. I think it does a good job. The whole getting splashed with chemicals, now you have superpowers. I respect that they didn't try to, again, make that more realistic or try to add to that.
Right.
It is what it is. That's how the Flash became the Flash. That's how Daredevil became Daredevil. It's whatever.
They don't even try to explain it, really. They just like, this is what happened. And I'm like, I like that too. Because again, like, I'm not here to find out how this thing that could actually happen to me won't actually give me superpowers. And this is why it does in this case. Like, I don't need it to do that.
Right. There's a lot I like here. Whenever he first comes to after his surgery, after his accident, he gets overwhelmed by his senses because he has these new heightened senses. And I'm going to go on record here and say, I think in any media, comics, TV shows, movies, I don't think we should ever see, quote unquote, Daredevil vision. I don't think they should ever try to show us how he interprets the world. I think it only makes the character weaker and less interesting. I think we shouldn't be able to comprehend how Daredevil sees the world because we don't have that ability. I think I'm kind of ragging on the TV show a lot. It's a good show, but the TV show was probably my least favorite version of this because they show Daredevil vision and he's like, it's like the world's on fire or something. And it's basically just a heat map. He sees what we see, but it's a heat map version.
Predator vision.
Predator vision. Yeah. So like now his disability is that he's colorblind. Like that's all. It just reduces it to that. Like if he can see just as well as us, that takes away a big appeal I have of that character.
Right.
Now, this movie kind of does that later on with the rain thing. We'll get to that. But here, if you're going to show us Daredevil vision, I like whenever he comes to and he sees everything, but it's all just cluttered together. He doesn't understand. It's very chaotic. He can't see his way around. It's just everything in like a 10-mile radius all stacked on top of each other. And it's cool. It's effective. And it helps us understand why he's kind of freaking out when he comes to. I like that. Now, you mentioned earlier that he finds out his dad is an enforcer and his dad is ashamed that his son saw him that way. And of course, resulted in that accident. He's running away from his dad, and that's whenever the chemicals get splashed into his eyes. And so his dad quits that business and decides to start training to be a boxer. There's a great line here because Ben Affleck is every now and then giving us a little bit of narration, telling us what's going on during the scene. And he says, we were two fighters on the comeback trail. And that's really cool. Just paralleling Daredevil as a kid, Matt Murdock, preparing his body with his new powers, learning how to use them, and his dad trying to get back into ring shape and fight legit. Very cool.
Yes, I like that. Obviously, I used to box for a fitness thing for several years, so I'm always good. I'm always up for a good boxing montage.
Oh yeah.
Never gonna have a problem with that. And and like again, just a lot of this was really, really good. Just you've spoken to it, but just it's presented really well. The guy who plays young Matt Murdock is really good. His dad is really good. And this is all just, it's if you're condensing an origin here, this is all done. Everything gets enough room to breathe, but it's not taking over the whole movie.
Now it culminates with his dad finding out he's about to prepare for a fight that his former boss, mob boss, was actually fixing on these fights. He wasn't actually making a comeback, or at least that's what his mob boss leads him to believe. And now he's saying that you've got to lose in this fight. Do what I say, or there'll be consequences. And did he catch that? He rattles off a few of the names that he beat. He says Miller, Mack, Bendis. Now I recognize two of those. Miller, I'm assuming Frank Miller. Yep. Bendis, Brian Michael Bendis, both very prolific writers that notably have written on Daredevil.
Yes.
Mack was the middle one. Is Mack? Is there a Mack?
David Mack is who that is referring to. He is an artist/writer who worked with Bendis on Daredevil, is responsible for co-creating the character of Echo, also wrote an arc after. So when Daredevil gets relaunched by Kevin Smith, who also himself features in a scene here we'll talk about in a bit, he writes it for 8 issues, and then there's this gap before Bendis comes on, and Mack writes that gap, and then Mack also draws several of the Bendis issues and would become a recurring collaborator of Bendis for some time, especially regarding the character of Echo, who is deaf as opposed to Matt being blind. So that was the new character they created there that ended up having a connection to Matt as well. That's referencing David Mack, who I've actually met. He was at Comic Palooza several years ago. Great dude.
Well, there you go. I love the shout outs to those notable creators. Daredevil, possibly my favorite Marvel character when it comes to comics. I mean, just a rad character, but has just had some top of the line, great creative teams behind him. I love Mark Waid's run. But you can jump to almost any era of Daredevil, and there's a high profile run there. And I kind of appreciate that it hasn't been one continuous run, say like Batman or Superman. There's like 4 or 5 volumes now. There's starts and stops, but that's okay. Don't force the comic out every single month if you don't have the creative team to turn out high profile stuff. So I think Daredevil's been handled very well.
I agree. That's actually not the end of our comic cameos either, because the fight that his dad is supposed to throw is against John Romita, another classic Marvel artist.
He plays the boxer?
He doesn't play him, but his name is John Romita. On the marquee.
Okay. I was gonna say impressive.
John Romita would have been old as hell then. But no, like the thing, it's Jack Murdock versus John Romita. And then they mention one of their clients is Mr. Lee, who pays them with fish. Like, I don't know if that's a reference to Stan Lee too, but again, so this movie really is like, there's a lot of like comic book, like between the cameos, the name drops, everything. There's so many names that are just being pointed here. And if there's a Daredevil run you like that isn't mentioned, it's probably just because it didn't happen yet. But yeah, there was this period of time there for a while where like your Daredevil run basically needed to end on this massive cliffhanger, and then the next guy got to fix it. That happened pretty much from Smith to Mack to Bendis to Brubaker.
Yeah, he's in prison at the beginning of Brubaker's, right?
Yeah, so at the end of Bendis's run, he puts him in prison. And then so Brubaker is the guy who gets to pick off from that. And then Brubaker was the guy that ended with him taking over the Hand. And then Andy Diggle was the guy that came in after that to fix it. So just again, you're talking from pretty much Miller on, just classic after classic, really. Like, and Bendis is a guy who is another kind of polarizing figure within comics. There are people that love his work. There are people that are less fans of his work. He notably made a jump to DC a few years ago, but he really cuts his teeth on a bunch of independent comics. But his first big like Marvel run is Daredevil, and it's in my mind still one of the best things he's done. It's a fantastic run from start to finish. He works with a cavalcade of artists on it, including prominently Alex Maleev, who he still collaborates with to this day. But yeah, pretty much start to finish, Daredevil is a character that 80s, 90s, 2000s, you're never going to have to look far to find a really good Daredevil run.
Last bit of imagery I like from this opening. His dad, as a boxer, is known as Jack the Devil Murdock. The robe he wears out to the ring has devil horns on it. At one point, Matt is wearing that robe during that leading up to the last fight. The young Matt Murdock with devil horns. It informs the character. I love seeing, like, it would be okay if it just as an adult he happened to come up with this persona Daredevil, but seeding it into his life in this way that really feels, I don't know if natural is the right word, but organic.
Yeah,
I think is really well done. And that's, most of that's from the comics. The movie is just taking inspiration there, but I think it's presented really well. Sometimes people get a little carried away with that, like Batman was inspired by a bat. Originally, a bat busted through his window. Oh, I'm Batman. And people kind of added on to that over and over throughout the years. Some were successful than others, but I think creating the character persona of Daredevil is handled really well here. Yeah, I really like that origin. If someone didn't know who Daredevil was going into this movie, you catch him up, and I would recommend that segment to anybody who's interested in learning the character. And as we talked about extensively, I would recommend almost any of these Daredevil runs we're talking about. Yeah. All very, very good.
And actually, I gotta point something out. The Devil, Jack the Devil Murdock, is actually a change from the comics. That's not what he's called. He's battling Jack Murdock in the comics. So giving him the kind of devil imagery is something this movie kind of shifts, and specifically calling him the devil. And I actually think that's a good move overall.
I do really like, I know I've seen that in the comics before. I wonder if they incorporate it after the movie, because I'm pretty sure I've seen that. But okay, hey, if Mark Steven Johnson is the one that came up with that, then I should give him more credit than I did already. Yeah, I think it's very cool.
Yeah, I know the name change is for sure. He's not Jack the Devil Murdock in the comics. He's battling.
Yeah, you're right,
Jack
battling.
Murdock.
Yeah,
but the hood may be carried over. I'm not sure, but yeah, either way, I think creating that through line, because the other Daredevil part of it too is obviously just he's risking his life all the time, and obviously the connections to the Catholic religion that he has. That's where that all comes together. But I think making that a more clear line from his dad to him, I think that's a good move.
We mentioned, right, this movie comes out February 14th, 2003. And oh boy, is it 2003.
Oh my God.
First thing I want to talk about is some of the CG I alluded to earlier. There's several key scenes, especially when he's fighting Bullseye, where we get full CG replacements. You don't see Ben Affleck or Colin Farrell on the screen. You get a CG version of them.
Yes.
2003, so specifically, the peak of this, because this is the same year we get the Matrix sequels. And I even as a, I don't know, I was 15, 16 then, even then, I'm watching this in theaters and I'm like, guys, the technology is not there yet. Like, that is clearly not a real person. And all three of those movies I've just mentioned have instances of that. And I didn't love it then. I don't love it now. But so 2003, I don't know why they're making that decision whenever it happens now all the time. And most of the time you don't notice. They can recreate a human being with a computer and slide it into a movie and you have no idea. But 2003, you can tell it gets a little rubbery.
Oh yeah, definitely. These days, like I said, the technology is a lot better, especially when people are like in full suits, like superhero suits. Obviously the texturing there is way more advanced than it was then. But yeah, there's definitely some rubber band here, and especially in that final Daredevil bullseye fight. There's a lot of very notorious scenes there. Yes.
Now, Andrew, what else makes this movie very 2003 in your opinion?
There is a scene where Elektra has a training montage, and it is set to that one Evanescence song everybody knows, Bring Me to Life. And that was, but like, not just that. This whole movie's like soundtrack. Like, if you look at the artists on it, it's Nickelback, it's Saliva, it's
Fuel, like, The Calling, Seether, Drowning
Finger
Pool,
11, like
Hoobastank, Figure 11. Yeah,
it's unbelievable. Like, it's I like I said, we've had this conversation before when a movie like snapshots itself to a certain time, because you kind of felt that ended like in the 80s, 90s, where like you were able to like tie movies to certain time periods.
Yeah.
Like, we've had a bunch of these where like just listening to those soundtracks, I was like, yep, we're in 2003. We are definitely in 2003.
Evanescence, not just one song, not just the hit.
Two.
Yeah. Also their song My Immortal, which plays during Elektra's father's funeral, which I think works pretty well there. I mean, it's still very 2003, don't get me wrong, but this album was kind of a big deal. Like, it's not the soundtrack, it's not music from and inspired by Daredevil. It's called Daredevil the album. I mean, it actually came out before Evanescence's debut album, so that's how that song was introduced. That, of course, blew up.
That Evanescence song was also the theme for, I think, a WWE pay-per-view this same month, February 2003. I think they used that Bring Me to Life for that as well. So yeah, that song is this whole like, you just look at this, like Moby, everybody. It's ridiculous, all the people that are on this soundtrack.
I'm a big fan of Fuel. I like them, and they're, Evanescence, like the music video was Daredevil inspired, as seen from the movie. And then Fuel was like the B single from this movie, and they played it in the closing credits. And being a Fuel fan, I was like, but guys, there's this Fuel song. No, this is a Fuel thing.
Guys, take me seriously, please. This is a top 10 album. This hit number 9 on the Billboard 200.
Amazing.
That's unbelievable to me that literally it did that.
I think this movie does a pretty good job depicting Matt Murdock as being blind. I mentioned some issues I have, like seeing Daredevil vision or whatever, but I think it's important that there are still some things that are going to get by him, and he has to live his life a little bit differently because he's blind. I think it's an important part of the character. It's good for representation. It's just interesting to see a different take on a superhero. We get a bit of his like morning routine. Some things a little extreme, like he's got to sleep in a contained coffin of water,
sound deprivation chamber or sensory deprivation chamber.
Right. But whenever he, wakes up, he's got his dollar bills in different folders that have Braille on them, so he knows what denomination they are. He folds them differently, so he knows what denomination he has in his wallet.
That's a real thing.
Yeah, it's cool. That's just cool that we get to see that.
Some of the more mundane stuff, like his suits. He's got the tags on the suits, so he knows which ones are which. He does this bit where he's out as Daredevil and he comes back, and he has like the locks on the roof to get into his place, and he just spins all 3 of them at once. And then he just stops them periodically because like he can hear when like they're in the right position. And I was like, that's kind of cool. I can't pretend cool. It wouldn't be. Yeah. But yeah, that stuff is all just kind of, like you said, it's little details. Again, we're showing some effort was put in here. Just makes it a little bit more immersive.
The very opening credits are pretty cool because it shows like the skyline, and then like the skyline fades away except for certain windows that are lit up, and those windows are braille, and then the braille turns into the opening credits. Pretty cool, pretty clever.
The people's names as they come through. Yeah, I thought that was a nice touch. I'd completely forgotten that too. Like I did not remember the credits did that.
This movie does something that very 90s Batman. Before Daredevil goes out to fight crime for the first time, you just get some action shots of him just
Suiting
performing
up
for the camera, putting a suit on, flipping his weapons around, putting them in their holster.
Yep.
Let's go. They basically do the same thing for Electra later, that training montage. You just see him getting ready for action. I will say, ultimately, I like that. I honestly, even something like the playground fight, it is weird. There's no getting around that. But there's nothing, in my opinion, inherently wrong with that. Andrew, we just watched Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. We watched Fantastic Four earlier this year. Those are very light-hearted, family-friendly, fun movies, and I could totally see a playground fight working in any of those movies in those tones. Those characters in a playground using their unique abilities, like I think would fit in well in a tone like that.
Sure.
So that in and of itself in a vacuum is fine. It's a little strange in this movie, which at times goes for a darker tone. This movie has a sex scene in it, which I don't know if I need that in any of my superhero movies. I mean, it bounces around a little bit, and that's,
the tone is definitely all over the place because like it's almost like it's like there's almost several different tones. That's not necessarily a problem if you're balancing the shifts well, but like the Daredevil stuff is all clearly meant to be like dark, moody, all of that kind of sensibilities there. But when he's Ben, God, I just keep wanting to believe Ben Affleck is Daredevil. But when he's Matt, like it goes into this much more like there's scenes with Matt like out in the daytime and it's bright and it's sunny and he's hanging out with Foggy and they're quipping back and forth, and that's not necessarily out of character, but it's the shifts between are not necessarily always graceful.
Those scenes out with Foggy are probably my favorite as far as Ben Affleck's performance. Him and Jon Favreau have really good chemistry. I love their scene in the coffee shop when Favreau's getting frustrated because they're not actually getting paid any real money. So Matt asks for some honey for his tea. I guess I wouldn't put that coffee. He has some honey for his tea, and since Jon Favreau's mad at him, he gives him a
mustard.
He gives him mustard instead. So Matt just squirts a bunch of mustard in his tea, but he knows what's going on. He knows what's up. So whenever Jon Favreau is distracted, he swaps their cups and he walks off to go meet Elektra for the first time. And the way it all plays out is pretty good. One of my favorite scenes of the movie.
Yeah.
I have my favorite non-Daredevil scene. Because he walks up and he's talking to Elektra. She's not looking up at him. And he's like, "Could you tell me where the honey is?" And she's like, "What, are you blind?" And of course he is. And they just have the nice little meet cute. And while that's happening, Foggy's looking over his shoulder, kind of seeing what's going on. And he takes a sip of his cup and then spews it out everywhere. It was good. Solid.
Yeah.
Works. Well written, well acted scene.
Yep. Just classic, almost classic, like rom-com type stuff. Like, very like classic meeting scene. But yeah, the Favreau Affleck chemistry is actually really, really good. I thought that was particularly strong. There are a lot of, I think the fights in this movie actually are pretty cool by and large. That bar fight, another comic book name drop. The criminal they're in a case against at the beginning, his name is Jose Quesada, which is meant to invoke Joe Quesada, another notable Daredevil artist of the time. But so after he gets off, they fail to, he gets acquitted. Daredevil goes after him basically, and he has this big bar fight where he's basically beating down this entire bar full of people all trying to kill him. And there were several moments that I was like, this is just cool. This is just fun to watch.
And, we mentioned like, Jennifer Garner obviously knows how to do action scenes. It's really what she's known for at the time. Yeah. And her rooftop fight with Daredevil, there's one shot that is just, it works. It's very cool. She throws her sai at Daredevil. She misses him and it gets lodged into a brick wall. She runs up and she does a backflip on the brick wall and pulls the Psy out and then lands on her feet. And it's done practically. It's done with wires. They don't do the CGI replacement thing here. And it all looks very good. It makes you wish you got more of that. It makes you wish, they didn't do the CG in some places. But I appreciate that. They could have done even more CG and body replacements, but they actually did some wire work. They did some rehearsing. They did some choreography. And whenever that is shining, I agree. I think it looks pretty good.
Yeah. The big bullseye fight, we mentioned it, that it's got a little bit of some rubbery people in it, but it is very intense and it's drawn out. It's basically after. So the culmination of that Elektra Daredevil bullseye fight is Elektra perishes by Bullseye's hand, which is from the comics. And so the cops show up though. So Bullseye and Daredevil both have to kind of slink away. And that's where the movie catches up to the beginning where Daredevil just kind of like falls into the church. That opening shot of him kind of like draped on the cross.
Straight from the comics.
That's straight from Guardian Devil by Kevin Smith and Joe Quesada. So then Bullseye shows up very nicely, lets the priest leave.
Yeah.
One of the few people in this movie he doesn't kill on like first contact.
He gives him a warning shot, he says.
Gives him a warning shot and lets him leave. And that kind of gives us this big fight scene. And where the CG comes in is because what ends up happening is this fight ends up going like into the upper reaches of the church, all over this organ, basically. This giant
organ. Yeah.
This giant organ. So like the pipes are falling over and they're swinging around and just it's just something that to practically do it, I'm sure also wasn't really feasible with all like the pieces moving and falling and everything. So I get why they went for CG here, but despite that, there's still some really cool moments here. Still like some ridiculous stuff. Like at one point, Bullseye he has this belt buckle that has these like throwing discs in it that have blades on them, and he throws them all at Daredevil and he lodges them all in his stick. So Bullseye missed like 6 times. So what Bullseye does is he like shatters a stained glass window and like catches all these broken
shards
pieces of glass,
yeah,
and then like launches them all at Daredevil, and none of them hit him. So at this point, he's furious. But there's one moment in this the final kind of throes of this fight where Daredevil gets the upper hand, because what ends up happening is they're kind of locked in their final fight and a sniper shoots at them and Daredevil moves Bullseye's hands so the bullet goes through both of them, takes away his hands, Bullseye's whole thing, and he's like asks him for mercy, and Daredevil throws him out the window basically, and he ends up crashing on the roof of Ben Urich's car. But I love that Ben Affleck looks out the window and goes, "Bullseye." And I was like, were you aiming for Urich's car the whole time? Like, did you know he was coming? Like, how did you know?
You know he's gonna say it. He throws him out the window. You see him crash, and you get a shot looking up at Ben Affleck, and it holds that shot for a long time. He's looking out the window, and the audience, you think, is he gonna do it? Is he gonna say it? Is he gonna say it?
Is he gonna
of course, it zooms on his face a little bit. Yeah, Bullseye.
My note is literally like, yes, Matt, if you were aiming for Urich's car, Bullseye indeed. We do get a connection from the main villain to our hero's origin, akin to Batman again here, where we find out that when there's a big moment where after as a child, he finds his dad dead, where a rose is left on his body, basically, and Matt picks it up and like kind of squeezes it and his hand starts bleeding,
which is cool imagery. You got to imagine it's the thorns and making his hand bleed, even though he's squeezing the petals. I don't know how it works, but
who knows?
It's this cool imagery of him, kind of that rage and that pain and that promise he's making over his dad's body, all done with just a shot of the kid's fist. Very well done.
So later, Kingpin gives a rose to Elektra's father, kind of slips it in his pocket, and then when Bullseye ultimately kills Elektra's father, he throws the rose down, and so we get that imagery. And then I think when Elektra is killed by Bullseye, he throws the rose down there too, and I think that's when Matt, through Bullseye's conversation, realizes the roses are Fisk's thing, and realizes that it was ultimately Fisk that killed his father way back in the day when he was just working for Fallon. I guess that was just his calling card. Do you ever dance with the devil in the pale moonlight, if you will? So we do get that line there. That's not from the comics, I don't believe. If it is, I missed it. But just again, trying to bring in some synergy.
No.
I don't think so either. I think we're just trying to make the stakes a little bit more personal.
You mentioned Kevin Smith has a cameo, and he does apparently as a character named Jack Kirby. I saw that online, but it must be on. They don't call him that. Certainly, he must have a name.
They call him Kirby.
Okay,
they call him Kirby. So at one point, so what happens is when Bullseye kills Elektra's father, he does it with Daredevil's staff. Like lodges into his chest. So Elektra thinks Daredevil killed her father, which is why she fights him later. This movie moves at like a breakneck pace. Like there's so much that happens in the last half of this movie. But the coroner / whatever forensic expert gets this staff and calls in Urich to look at it. And he hands him the money and he's like, "This better be good, Kirby." And Kevin Smith's like, "It's always good." And he takes him over, and that's when Kevin Smith's character is the one who finds out the Daredevil staff turns into Matt's like walking stick that Urich had seen earlier. So now Urich puts 2 and 2 together. But yeah, Kevin Smith getting his own cameo. The only speaking cameo of all the comic cameos in this movie, because
and it's
Miller and Stan Lee both don't talk.
It's really fun. I mean, he does a good job, and just the fact that Kevin Smith, obviously a huge comic book fan, a comic book writer who has notably written for Daredevil, and best buds Ben Affleck. So I don't know which one of those things is the reason he's in this movie. Probably a combination of all of them.
Yes,
but he was fun to see here.
Because Ben Affleck actually wrote the introduction to the trade paperback of the Daredevil run he did before this movie. So and like I said, this is actually one of those cameos that I think mostly works. It's not drawn out. It's pretty limited. It actually serves a purpose to the greater story of letting Urich figure out who Daredevil is. And I think it's effective and it's fun. It's not derailing anything. It's just a good time.
Now, Matt Murdock, Daredevil, has an arc in this movie. We'll probably talk a little bit about how they go about telling it or how successful it is. But I like the story that they are telling. Now, Daredevil is traditionally a little bit darker of a character, and certainly not Punisher level. He's not murdering people left and right. That's not really what he's known for, but he kind of rides that line. Throughout most of this movie, Daredevil is full-on vigilante, anti-hero, you might even say.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it, there's in the beginning, as an attorney, as Matt Murdock, he's unable to put this man behind bars because Kingpin basically paid people off to make sure that he got out. So as Daredevil, he hunts this man down and he murders him. He throws him in front of a subway car. It's my line is the opening of this movie. See that light at the end of the tunnel? That's not heaven. That's the C train. And it literally cuts the man in half. Because we see later, the coroner's there and they've got sheets over him and the man's body is in 2 halves.
Brutal.
Now, that's where we start with Daredevil. In a later scene, he's hunting down another criminal and he's pummeling this guy for information, punching him in the face, looking for information on Kingpin. And that criminal's son is in the room, and the son sees him, and the son is scared of Daredevil and he's crying. And he tells the kid, "I'm not the bad guy, kid." But based on what that kid just saw, a man dressed like a devil knocking the crap out of this guy, you can't blame the kid for being a little scared.
Yeah.
With his face off against Kingpin, he has an opportunity to murder the man that he now knows killed his father. And he decides not to do that. He decides justice will be served for him going to prison. And that arc, I like it. I like that he learns a lesson as far as what this Daredevil persona should be, how far he should take things. I mean, it's a good story to be told.
I agree. I think it's a good balance because even just seeing the stuff that gets caught up in the crossfire, not just with the kids seeing him, but just like Elektra's dad ends up stuck in the crossfire of him and he's not able to save her. And like, he's realizing that the pain he can cause, even though he's trying to do good, the methods he's using early in this film are still hurting those around him sometimes. So to kind of find that right balance of helping, but not giving in to essentially the dark side, as it were. I think it works. It's a good arc. You know how else I know this movie is from 2003?
How's that?
When Foggy and Matt are at that party and Wilson Fisk is coming down the stairs. Foggy says, "Oh, look, Wilson Fisk in the hizzy."
In the hizzy.
2003. You were a lot easier to define than I thought you were.
Andrew, I think that does it for Daredevil talk.
I think so.
It's not a perfect movie. Honestly, this movie, along with Hulk, which I'm realizing now came out the same year, incredible.
Yeah.
Whenever I tell people, I got a podcast, this is what it's about, it's about superhero movies, but it's about the other ones, less well-received ones. And like people are like, oh, Daredevil, like, or Hulk. Like, those are people's go-to movies very often. So I'm glad we got to talk about them. Glad we've revisited both of these movies. Daredevil, it's not perfect, but you probably know that. If you're listening to this or if you've seen the movie, it's not a perfect movie. And that's not our goal here. What we want to talk about, what we want to say is there is some stuff in here that genuinely works. Some of it works really well. There's some key scenes in this movie. I mean, the fact that we didn't even have the same pick for Mark Strong Award or Best Scene just goes to show that there's probably more to like here than you might remember.
I agree. I was actually kind of surprised watching it back. Like you said, there's definitely some standouts. And even again, like some of the stuff that's been hyped as like being the worst parts of the movie, I don't think are that bad. They're certainly not bringing it down like the internet discourse may suggest. So I think if you're coming into this, especially if you haven't watched it in a while, I think you'll definitely be able to find some stuff to like here.
Like that suit. Now, listeners, I am going to make a plea with you. If you could be so kind, what we would appreciate is if you left us a review on Apple Podcasts. And I'm going to go one step further and ask you to leave a review for any podcast that you regularly listen to. We like hearing the nice words, but it's a big help to a certain climate change activist's ability to dance. You know what I'm talking about. The Al Gore rhythm.
Folks, we've reached the end of Best of the Rest. We've come to the end.
It helps. We like it. Leave a review, just like this one left by Geronimo Joe, who says, "This is how we should be watching movies. BOTR is not just fun and entertaining, but it challenges you to think for yourself. Before beginning any movie, a person can instantly look up ratings and reviews pulled from thousands of viewers and critics. Not only do we have easy access to this info, but for many movie watchers, it's as if we go to the internet first to ask it permission to like a movie before watching it. The best part of BOTR is this. It reminds us that it's okay to love unpopular movies." That was in all caps. "Each episode, you'll learn a ton of cool stuff about each movie they discuss. What's even better is that Chris and Andrew will teach you how to truly enjoy every movie you watch. Thanks, guys. I appreciate what y'all do." Now, thank you so much, Geronimo Joe. That's a great review. I don't think we're teaching people anything. I wouldn't go that far, but I think, as we've said many times, this podcast is part of just a personal challenge to be more positive and seek out positives, because that just is healthy. That's more rewarding, I think. So not just in the movies you watch, but every aspect of life. If you're trying to err on the side of positivity and focusing on what's working, you're just going to have a better time. That's my belief anyway.
I agree. I've told you before, it's really easy to be cynical. It's extremely easy to be negative. It's easy to look at something and just be like, well, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. And just the personal challenge, just like you said, was to be like, well, what if you don't look at it that way? What if you look at it the other way? What if you ask yourself, well, okay, I don't like these things, but what do I like? Don't approach it from the perspective of looking for the bad, look for the positive. And like you said, when you bring that through to not just movies, but kind of everything, you just feel better.
Yeah. And I think it's important to recognize the things that do work in these movies, because people have talked about Daredevil a lot, but most of those conversations on the internet, I'm going to guess, are like, oh, Daredevil sucks, Ben Affleck's bad, and that's kind of the end of it, right? Yeah. And I'm not even going to say that's wrong if you think that, but in addition to those things that maybe don't work, there's also some things that do, because remember, maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and follow us on Twitter at BOTRcast. Thank you. I like Joey Pants though. I like Joey Pants. Oh my God. I like Joey Pants a lot.